Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an ancient engineering magic trick that honestly defies belief. I mean, we all know the Roman Colosseum, right? Sand, stone, gladiators. But hidden in its early history is an aquatic secret that sounds like a total myth, yet it was a massive, wet reality.
So picture this. You're standing in a dry, sandy arena. The Italian sun is beating down on you, and you have to ask yourself, how on earth did the Romans manage to flood this gigantic space for full-scale naval warfare? It's one thing to build a massive stadium. It is an entirely different level of genius to engineer a temporary lake right in the middle of ancient Rome.
This impossible spectacle actually had a name. They called them the Naumachiae. Basically, these were mock naval battles that completely transformed the arena into a brutal theater of war on the water. But figuring out how they actually pulled this off, well, that requires us to look at an absolute masterclass in ancient plumbing, logistics, and frankly, raw human ambition.
Okay, here's how we're going to break down this master plan. First, the ultimate Roman spectacle. Then, tearing up the floor, flooding the arena, the naval battle, draining and resetting, and finally, the end of Naumachia. Let's get into it. Part 1. The ultimate Roman spectacle, a stage of unprecedented scale.
Right before we can even begin to flood this stage, we've got to wrap our heads around the sheer size of the Colosseum itself. 50,000. That was its seating capacity. And you know what? This wasn't just a random crowd. This audience was packed with citizens organized by strict social rank, all showing up to watch the impossible happen right in front of them. To put that space into perspective, the arena floor measured 83 by 48 meters. That is large enough to fit nearly a dozen modern tennis courts inside. Think about that vastness for a second. Transforming 12 tennis courts into a deep functioning lake, that's an absolute marvel of environmental manipulation. Which brings us to part 2, tearing up the floor, creating the basin.
Because obviously, the Romans didn't just pour water on the dirt and hope for the best. They had to physically deconstruct the arena first. Step 1, workers actually removed the entire wooden arena floor. Then, step 2, they dismantled the massive timber pillars that supported it. Imagine the sound of that, the creaking of heavy timber as hundreds of workers labored through the night, systematically tearing out the very ground the gladiators fought on.
By tearing out all that wood, workers systematically stripped the arena bare, revealing a massive, empty concrete basin underneath, perfectly primed to hold water. It really brilliantly highlights the temporary nature of the early Colosseum's floor. It was literally designed to be easily taken apart just for these jaw-dropping aquatic shows.
Moving on to part 3, flooding the arena, the Roman water web.
Let's look at the exact step-by-step genius of this hydroengineering. First, they diverted water from the nearby aqueducts. Next, they routed that water into a highly specific network of underground channels that were carved directly into the building's concrete foundation. From there, the water flowed into a continuous channel that surrounded the arena, and finally it was distributed through various outlets to evenly fill the basin. Just picture that, rushing water from the aqueducts surging through those custom-carved concrete channels.
Now, the flooding process was a significant undertaking that required several hours to complete. It took immense patience, flawless plumbing, and precise calculations. But within just a few hours, that dry basin was completely replaced by a shimmering, artificial lake sitting right in the heart of Rome.
Part 4. The Naval Battle. Carnage on the Water.
With the stage completely transformed, those 50,000 spectators were treated to a brutal and breathtaking aquatic war. Actual warships were brought right into the flooded basin. The crews, well, they consisted of condemned prisoners and slaves forced to reenact historic naval clashes. And these combatants fought to the death until one side was entirely annihilated. The clashing of wooden ships, the splashing water, the sheer reality of these forced reenactments. It really turned a brilliant engineering feat into a terrifying theater of death.
Part 5, draining and resetting, the magic trick's resolution. So, once the bloody spectacle ended, the Romans were faced with a seriously daunting logistical nightmare. How do you reset a massive lake back into a dry arena for the next day's events? Because you obviously can't just leave a stagnant lake sitting in the middle of the city, especially when you have dry gladiator games scheduled for the very next morning. The contrast between the two setups is just staggering. For the Naumachia, you have this deep water basin with floating warships and aquatic combat. But for the gladiator setup, they had to rapidly replace the entire wooden floor, scatter sand to absorb blood, and ready the hidden trapdoors for animals. They had to transition instantly from a floating battlefield back to a dry, sand-covered stage.
To pull off this rapid reset, the water was cleared out through 4 large drainage channels located underneath the arena floor. And get this, these channels connected directly to the city's massive sewer system. You can almost hear the sucking sound of the massive drains as millions of gallons of water were efficiently purged away in a flash. Interestingly enough, this exact same system efficiently managed heavy natural rainfall, which kept the Colosseum from flooding by accident.
And finally, Part 6. The End of Naumachiae. Killed by Innovation. Here is where the story takes a super fascinating turn. This incredible aquatic spectacle was actually incredibly short-lived, and it was ultimately killed by another engineering marvel. In 80 AD, the Colosseum was inaugurated, and the mock naval battles were at their absolute peak. But barely a decade later, around 90 AD, Emperor Domitian built a massive permanent structure beneath the floor. And from that point on, flooding the arena became permanently impossible.
That permanent structure was called the hypogeum. Basically, it was a 2-story masonry structure built right into the basin, featuring permanent stone walls to house animal cages and complex elevators. Because these permanent stone walls replaced those old removable wooden supports we talked about earlier, the Colosseum could never be transformed into a water basin again.
Which leaves us with this final fascinating irony. Did the Colosseum's greatest architectural upgrade tragically kill its most spectacular show? By building the ultimate backstage area with the hypogeum, Roman engineers inadvertently engineered their ultimate magic trick completely out of existence. It really makes you wonder, you know? What amazing things do we build over today in the name of progress? Anyway, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.